Democratic Alliance calling for a rejection of blanket restrictions tonight. This as the vaccine drive to inoculate teachers began today. The Democratic Alliance says South Africa's vaccine program has been disgraceful, unforgivable, and a failure. DA leader John Seinezan joins me now to talk more on this. John, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. Well, one would argue that it is the instrument that has been used the world over to reduce or at least to curb the rise in infections. Why would you call it an absolute failure?
Are you talking about the vaccines or are you talking about lockdowns?
I'm talking blanket restrictions.
Oh, blanket restrictions.
Yeah.
Well, I think that where blanket restrictions have been applied, they've been used to generate better hospital capacity and improve the number of hospital beds that are available and ensure that your medical personnel are able to be greatly increased. That has not been the case in South Africa. And ironically, we're going into this third wave with probably less hospital beds and personnel than we had available in the first wave. Particularly in a place like Gauteng, we've had the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital, which has had their COVID wing had burnt down in April. It has not been replaced, and it's little wonder there's a huge shortage there because those beds have not been replaced, and we've got a manpower problem in terms of no funds to be able to pay overtime. So it's one thing you're using lockdowns, but it's another thing to have a comprehensive and proper vaccine rollout. So even those countries that have had blanket restrictions have been vaccinating at scale, hundreds upon thousands of people per day to be able to reach their targets. We're not doing that. And the only tool government has now left at its disposal is shutting down the economy and creating even more economic hardship than has already been wrought by lockdowns. And as long as we remain without a coherent, comprehensive, transparent, and accountable vaccination drive in South Africa, we're going to face a fourth wave, a fifth wave, with potentially more lockdowns, which means our economy is going to take far longer to be able to become competitive with other markets around the world and other economies around the world. And while other countries, including those in Africa, start to open up again to tourists and the like, we're still going to be way behind the curve in terms of being able to be ready for that.
Now, there's no question, of course, that our vaccine has been slow compared to what has been happening in the world. In fact, it's been even set back again by another 2 million vaccines, which we had to destroy because of the contamination of the ingredients. But the question is, even the countries who are more advanced in their vaccination, who have no financial barriers, are seeing a rise in numbers again with huge populations of those countries being vaccinated, which says there's something more that needs to happen more than just vaccination. We actually need to help our societies behave better.
Well, vaccinations are the only way out of this, Thabo, and we can, unless we're going to keep the world and countries in eternal lockdowns and never return to a sense of normality that we had before. Vaccinations and ensuring that those people who are vulnerable are protected from death and from serious illness is going to be critical going forward. And that is the game changer. That is why in a month's time, the UK will probably open up completely. It's why countries like Israel will open up completely. But many other countries, including those in Africa, bear in mind that we are one of the least vaccinated nations in Africa. We're 33rd on the continent in terms of people vaccinated, with just less than 1% of our population that's been vaccinated. And this leaves us hugely vulnerable to the third wave. So while other countries may be going through waves, it's going to have a far less fatal effect on their economies and on their populations, and they will be able to protect far more lives and livelihoods than we're going to be able to going into this third wave as one of the least vaccinated nations in the world.
So how would you say would be the correct way to respond? What would be an appropriate response?
So I mean, we accept the fact that governments dropped the ball on vaccines. They refuse to admit it, but it is the case. We're dragging around the rest of the world trying to get the dregs of vaccines and trying to put those out. We are short of vaccines, even where we've got successful vaccine programs. They are not being supplied by national government in terms of getting the actual vaccines to those sites. But there's a number of interventions that can be made now, particularly in a place like Gauteng. So, for instance, the Charlotte Macleay Hospital, we should move the staff from there to Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. That we should urgently look at putting up field hospitals. The Charlotte Macleay Hospital burnt down in April. We're now sitting at the end of June, and we still don't have that hospital up and running. Yeah. The Western Cape government was able, within a space of 4 weeks, to put an 850-bed hospital together at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. So government resources need to be focused there. We then also need to release money from the national fiscus to be able to pay the nursing staff overtime and overtime around the country to ensure that vaccinations can continue. One of the unforgivable reasons that's been given for why we're not vaccinating over weekends is that there's no money for overtime. Now, surely that you prioritize the money from the national fiscus towards overtime, there's no price you can put on a life. And we should be finding that money and redirecting it from areas of non-essential spending into this program of vaccination. We should be vaccinating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to ensure that we're able to get as many jabs and arms. That's the only game changer that's going to get us out of this terrible trajectory of lockdown and suffering and misery, and onto some semblance of being able to reestablish our economy and our lives going forward. Without that successful rollout, there's simply no light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to continue with endless waves of the pandemic, and we're going to be left with only one tool in government's arsenal, and that's to lock down every time. And while other economies are going to have opened fully, we're going to be going through these interminable lockdowns, and this is going to have grave effects on South Africa's employment figures and on our economic viability as a country. It
seems we have very limited options, John, as far as moving people around. I mean, from my conversation with the MEC last night, the city of Johannesburg, you're looking at 57% bed occupancy with those confirmed to be COVID positive. And if you include those who are still awaiting their test results, that number shoots up to 96%. So I don't know how moving them around would actually help. As far as it seems, the occupancy is quite full.
Well, it's no use having staff at Charlotte Macleay Hospital with no COVID ward. The point I'm making is that you should move those people from the Charlotte Macleay Hospital into the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. There must be staff that would have been there to staff that original 1,000-bed hospital, and we should move them across. And that's also why only 100 of Chris Hani Baragwanath's 500 available beds are currently operational. It's because of staff constraints. And so the province is going to have to get smart and start to use resources more cleverly to be able to ensure that those who need assistance and those who need nursing and medical attention are able to receive it. So I don't buy that argument from the MEC. I think that it's an evasive argument. I think that you have a situation where you had a 1,000-bed hospital that burnt down. Those staff must be able to be transferred to one of the other sites where they can assist in providing more beds and providing personnel to be able to meet those challenges.
Now, it's been made clear, at least by the companies, I know the Western Cape tried to procure vaccines, that they will not deal with anyone else but national at this particular point, and that's the route that they're going to take. So how do you assist national to do its job better?
Well, the big thing here is that national should have listened when we were speaking last year, because that was vaccine order time, and that's why many of the other countries in the continent and across the world got in the queue ahead to be able to sit with vaccines. We're now scrounging around for the scraps around the world, and which is why we're sitting with these small amounts coming in. I think it's a great pity that national government chose to dominate this process. I think that if they'd opened it up a little bit more to other governments and to the private sector, I think we would have had a far greater inflow of vaccines into South Africa. And I don't think we'd be sitting with a case today where governments missed every single one of the targets it set for itself, and its vaccine program is non-transparent and in complete disarray. We have vaccination sites in the Western Cape, for instance, that are ready to go, that can be administering vaccines. The problem is there are no vaccines. They're not coming in fast enough. And I think that is unforgivable in the middle of a pandemic, that you have sites ready to be able to deliver vaccines that are sitting unable to do so because the actual product is not there. And I think we've had a lot of excuses from government. I don't think we've had nearly enough acceptance that they've dropped the ball. But here's what I would do. I would get the private sector on board, and I would say, right, it's open season. You guys go out and find as many vaccines around the world as you can, and get them into South Africa, and let's start getting them into arms. Every extra vaccine that finds its way into South Africa is one more person that is potentially receiving a life-saving lease on life, or an ability to be able to continue working and providing for themselves and their families. With government keeping a stranglehold on this thing, they have clearly demonstrated there's no efficiency or effectiveness. And like everything else they've touched, whether it's the airways or whether it's electricity generation and supply, where you have a government monopoly, right, things don't work. Open it up. Let's get as many vaccines and jabs and arms as we can possibly get.
Johnson Hayes, and I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us tonight on In Focus. DA leader there for us tonight, responding, of course, to the latest talk of tighter restrictions as the country battles a third wave. We'll continue.